There's two words, show and business. That's probably the most important thing I can leave. Obviously, you have to be good at the talent show part. If you don't fancy doing the business part, that's okay too. But you've got to get somebody who does.
Mickey, I gotta tell you something. As a young kid growing up on Long Island, when I watched the Monkees and watched you play drums, it was another form of inspiration that I just said, look at the fun he's having. What you were having with acting and theater and the musical that was, with playing drums, this was a combination of just joy and passion at its highest level. So I thank you for all that inspiration, and I thank you for joining us here at the sessions. This is fun, it's exciting, and you really are special because it's acting, it's music, it's directing, it's many aspects of Mickey Dolenz. So tell me just in the beginning, where did all of this begin with you as a child?
My parents, they were both in the business, singers, actors. They met doing a play in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. My mom was a big band singer in the 40s and actress. My dad was from Italy, and he was a swashbuckling kind of actor type and also sang. And so he would get musical movies where he would do Mario Lanza.
Old Italian singer,
kind of
sure.
Some enchanted evening. But he would sing it walking through the living room naked, which you may see as strange. So music and acting, showbiz, was my life from a child. And I didn't know anything else. I thought everybody's father was an actor. That was the beginning of the whole thing. I ended up following in my father's footsteps. My first musical endeavor was piano. At 4 or 5 years old, little teacher down the street. But my father, God love him, old school, if I didn't practice, I'd get a spanking. And so to this day, I cannot sit down at a piano without having my butt hurt. So piano did not become my forte. But then he got me into classical guitar, Segovia.
Andre Segovia, the great Spanish classical player.
And
Beautiful.
Villalobos and others.
Yeah.
I had already done that series, Circus Boy, where I was an actor playing the kid in the circus.
Absolutely, yeah.
But there was music always around our house. Like I said, my mom played piano, she would sing, we bought records, Chattanooga Choo Choo, and my dad, like I said, was singing, and he was like working up an audition piece, and he'd be singing some song. And then he got me into classical guitar, and about 10, 12 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I remember him playing Segovia records, and I'm going, that's not one man. That cannot be one person. He says, yes, it is. And I'm like, how did he do that? I got a little Goya guitar, nylon string Goya, and I really loved it. I practiced, and I really was into it, and I got lessons, because I would bring it to parties when I got into junior high and high school, or on the beach in the summer.
Yeah.
And I'd play Malagueña. And then one day, some cute girl must have said, do you know any Kingston Trio? It's like late 60s, late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'll be right back. And I hang down your head, Dom Dooley, hang down your head. And so I learned the value of music and singing and stuff. And so that got me into kind of folk music.
Nice. Early
60s, late 50s, it was Kingston Trio, it was Peter, Paul and Mary.
Right.
And I played for a couple of years, and I would do little hootenannies and have a friend, and we'd go out and sing at parties. But it was, folk music. And then that morphed into rock and roll, even pre-Beatles, I was doing cover tunes of other rock and roll. A lot of Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Fats Domino.
Fantastic.
To give you a real nutshell.
Yeah.
Me in a nutshell. My audition piece for the Monkees was Johnny Be Good.
Beautiful.
By Chuck Berry.
Absolutely.
Need I say more?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how the musical sort of guitar progression. And to this day, I play acoustic guitar in the show, in my show, and whenever I can.
That is great. So Circus Boy was a beginning stage of the acting part of it. What was that like being that young?
Well, it wasn't the very, very beginning. Even at like 6 or 7, my father's agent, I guess, had said, there's a movie being made, and they want a little kid to play. You could never do this now, so politically incorrect. They want a kid to play a little Mexican boy about this movie where a imaginary, fictitious kind of, I can't remember exactly, magic bull comes down from the rings of Saturn. It was called the rings of Saturn. This magic bull comes down, this little Mexican boy, and we were going to shoot it in Mexico. Then the government fell, and they never made the movie. And I have screen tests of this still. They put brown kind of makeup on me, and my daddy taught me how to talk like that. And my bull is such a beautiful bull, and he's going to win every bullfight in the entire world. And I have screen tests of me doing this at 6 or 7 years old. So it was in the air, you know. My father had an agent, and I went for auditions occasionally. And then Circus Boy came along, and I got it. I went down. I almost didn't go. My mom said, there's an audition for a new series. Do you want to go? And I was like, I got a baseball game. Come on, Mom. Let's get our priorities right, you know. But I don't know why, at the last minute, I just said, oh, yeah, okay, we'll go. I was never pushed. There was no eyes and teeth, honey.
Yeah.
Eyes and teeth.
Yeah.
Never any of that. And the stage mom kind of, we lived in the valley with horses and, you know, gardens and rural thing. But I went, and I got it, and I wasn't stupid. I knew how important and valuable, from my father's career, how important and valuable it could be to have a television series. And it was huge. It ran for 3 years or so, network television. And
the foundation was laid down. Here you are now. You've got music in your life. You've got acting in your life. What went from there then? As you got a little older, what was the next stage?
After Circus Boy, my mom and dad sent me to what they said at the time was an educational counselor. Because I'd been out of the public system, school system, social system, for 3 years, at 10, 11, and 12 years old, very formative.
Absolutely.
They said they wanted to find out kind of where I was at. I think, in retrospect, it was a psychiatrist. Because I remember doing Rorschach, and what do you think about your mother? And I guess what he said was, you must take this boy out of the business immediately. He is crazy. And they did.
Oh, really?
After Circus Boy, so wise, and I thank them to God for this, for that decision they made. I was offered another show called Cabin Boy, and it was a spin-off of Treasure Island.
Yes.
And it was the kid that was in the apple barrel with the, the whole Treasure Island.
Yes.
Because I'd grown up now, and I was a little, not cute, little 10-year-old anymore. I was like a teenager. And I didn't know this at the time. And they turned it down. They said, no, we're taking him out. He's out of here.
Interesting in what they did. So that's the
smartest thing they ever did, because I avoided that period after being a child star where, the success part is kind of easy. Adulation and love and, oh, you're just the cream of the crop, the talk of the town. And then all of a sudden, at 12, it's like you're a has-been.
Yeah.
You're out of it. It's gone. And puberty is tough enough for anybody in any capacity. But to be like a has-been and nobody loves me anymore, and that is, I'm afraid, I believe that's where a lot of the problems start and become. Traditionally, it's the aftermath of you're huge, you're big, you're lovely, everybody loves you. A few have made it through.
Yeah.
Shirley Temple, obviously,
Absolutely, yeah.
and others. Yeah. We know the stories. I mean, it can be ugly. So they just said, that's it, boom. Next day, literally the next day, after Circus Boy went off the air, I was in public school. My bleach blonde roots were still growing out, from the hairdresser. And I was in public school. I was like down and dirty. And one of the smartest things they ever did, because then I went through junior high and high school, just a little bit as a, mascot, people would recognize me. But I grew up in an area where there were it was big showbiz, there was a lot of kids that had come off as Johnny Washburn from Flicka, Bobby Diamond from Fury, Lee Aker. I mean, it was not uncommon to have little child stars that were, So I lived a very normal high school life, learning Tom Dooley for the girls. And,
so now you're getting out of high school. Okay, now you were about, when the Monkees kind of started, you were 19 around there? Was this?
Yeah, but I got out of high school very early. I was 2 or 3 years before everybody because of being tutored privately during Circus Boy. I skipped 2 or 3 grades. Wow. In fact, my parents kept me back 1 grade, which kind of messed up my academic, life, because it was boring. I did 9th grade twice because the psychiatrist had said he can't go into high school at 12. Yeah, that's what would have happened. I would have been like in high school at like 12 or 13 or something. He said socially he's a child, and high school in those days was 10, 11, and 12th grade. So they kept me back, which was a good idea socially probably. So I went to high school and hadn't been doing any showbiz, nothing at all. And after high school, my father passed away, unfortunately, like the next year. That was ended up with being a little bit of an aimless period. Yeah. I was drifting around. I tried a little junior college stuff, did some classes in anthropology and psychology and physics and stuff. I always had quite a scientific bent, even early on. Electronics, I would build Heath kits, and my dad was very, very handy and was always building stuff and could do electrical stuff and plumbing stuff and things. So I always knew that. And after high school, I was like, I don't know. So I started, I got an agent. Some guy tracked me down at 17 years old or something like that, 18. And I started doing guest shots for summer money. It was like, you got to go and audition for a part on Peyton Place with Ryan O'Neal, and I went in, I got it. I did 3 episodes, or I did this Mr. Novak, or I did, played usually a bad guy. I would play the delinquent because I had a kind of a delinquent kind of face and dork, kind of an idiot, kind of a punk, So I got quite a few of those. While I'm just kind of drifting along, doing a few classes in junior college and stuff, and a friend of mine comes up to me one day and says, you know what, we should be architects. We should start a building architectural renovation thing where we put on people's extra bathroom, it's a building kind of thing. And I jumped at it. I was like, wow, what a great idea. I loved building. I always had tools. I always had stuff. My dad had taught me. And we both started architectural drafting courses at LA Trade Tech. And we started. And I'm like, 18, 19 years old, driving down into downtown LA every day. And I loved it. I was like, and that was my plan. I was going to be an architect. If I couldn't make it as an architect, I could fall back on showbiz.
Yeah. People usually think the reverse of that.
Yeah.
But that's what you were doing. Beautiful.
That was the plan. And then the Monkee audition comes along. Now, I had already been up for a few shows that year. 66 was a big year for, well, every year was big for pilots, television pilots. But 66, I remember noticing that there were a plethora of music-oriented series, ideas.
Yeah.
It was in the air.
Yeah.
Obviously, the British invasion, but even before that, there was folk music, there was Beach Boys, surfing, and I was up for 4 different shows that year. Because I wasn't stupid. I knew the value of a series, but I was just thinking I can make some money if I get a shot. And while I'm going to school, studying to be an architect. I remember the shows vaguely. One was a folk group and 3 like Peter, Paul, and Mary kind of thing. It was called The Happeners, I even remember. And it went to pilot, that one. Did not sell, but it did go to pilot. There was another one, I don't remember the title, like a surfing group, Beach Boy, kind of surfers. It did not go to pilot, but I read for it. Another one was like a big, remember the New Christie Minstrel, kind of mighty wind?
Yes,
like
yes.
20 people on stage.
Yes.
Hammer and a hammer in the that did not go to pilot, but I was up for that. And then there was the Monkees. And I so clearly remember that first, because I didn't go to the cattle call, because I had already had a television series. So when you've already starred in your own series, one doesn't go to the cattle call. One has one's own private audition with the producers. And I remember going to that interview at Columbia Studios, probably the same office where I went for Circus Boy, same studio.
Beautiful.
And I walk in with my sides. I had the sides from the script. There were these couple of guys sitting there in jeans and T-shirts, not much older than me. I thought they were there for the audition. They were the producers. That was Bob Rafelson, of course, who became incredible director, producer, and Bert Schneider, who was the executive producer. And they weren't much older than me, and there was like pizza boxes and coffee cups and stuff all around. Very different from your typical Hollywood producer interview at that time, which was usually much older gentleman with a suit and a tie and a cigar.
Right.
And the other auditions I'd been to did have that sort of vibe to it. We want to make a show the kids will like. Well, Bob and Bert were kids still. They were huge Beatles fans. They were huge 60s. They were part of the zeitgeist, one of my favorite words. And I could tell even at that moment, that first interview, this is different. This is different than anything else I've gone up for. This is speaking to the zeitgeist of the time, and indeed it was.
That moment, it was really exciting. Wow.
Oh, very exciting, yeah. And I did my lines, I read the thing, and I left. I did one kind of cool thing that I don't even remember, but they told me about later. They had all these coffee cups, and I could tell that they were into spontaneity and improvisation, and it wasn't just about reading the lines of the script. I did that. But then they said, what do you do? Who are you? What? Blah, blah, boom, bada, bing, bada, boom, bada. They were like intense and spontaneous.
Yeah.
And I don't remember specifically, but they told me that they had all these coffee cups around stacked up and stuff. And I went over and I went, check. And they told me that was one of the things that they fell in love with me for. Anyway, that was only the beginning of a very extensive audition process, which I had never been through before. Usually you went in, you read your lines, maybe you'd come back for a callback. Sometimes, rarely, you'd do a screen test, just camera. But this went on for, it seems like it went on for months. Probably not. It was only probably weeks, but for an 18, 19-year-old kid.
Felt it, yeah.
There was improvisational interviews where they would just run the camera and ask me stupid questions. And then there was music. You had to play. You had to be able to play and sing to even get through the first round. You had to be able to play and sing. So they clearly must have had in mind that if this happens, we want these people to be able to perform. Obviously, because they wouldn't have bothered. They would have just hired actors and dubbed the voices like they did in movies at the time.
At the time, yeah.
And then there was scene study. There was like scenes where we got dialogue and then blah, blah. And it went from 32 to 16, like the playoffs. It's like 32 to 16 to 8, and then the final four. But it was intense. I mean, but I so remember thinking, I really want this one. The other ones, I was like, but I really want this one. This is different. This is a different vibe. And that was because these guys were not much older than I was. They were into that scene. And I don't know, you'd have to talk to them about what their intentions were. But looking back in hindsight, it was musical theater on television. You know, the closest thing that I've seen recently that kind of touches on it is a show like Glee.
Absolutely.
Which is a television show about an imaginary glee club.
Right.
And they use character names, and they're in some set. It's this high school, right? But they can sing, they can dance, they can act, they can play, they can do it all. Fame was another. Remember Fame?
Right, absolutely.
It was fictitious, but it was real. That is what the Monkees was. And to this day, people don't necessarily all get that. That it was a television show. It was not a group. The Monkees was not a group. It was not a band. It was a television show about a band, a fictitious band that didn't really exist yet, that lived in this set, a beach house in Malibu, which begs the question, how could we afford a beach house in Malibu when we never got any work? And we had these adventures. We did use our real names, which is debatable what that has meant over the decades. But it was a TV show about this imaginary group that wanted to be the Beatles. It wasn't that hackneyed, fake news thing about the Monkees were the answer to the Beatles. No, it was not. It was a TV show about a group that wanted to be the Beatles, but we never made it. It was the struggle for success that endeared it to the masses. All those kids out there around the world that were in their basements, in their living rooms, that they were trying to get the record deal, trying to get a gig at the local club, because we never made it on the TV show. It was so smart. That was such a smart.
Brilliant, because I can remember when watching it when I was younger, that's kind of what I got out of it. These guys were struggling like myself as a musician was struggling. And that's, I think, what related to many, many musicians. You guys were serious actors at what you were doing. We related to that feel that you're really trying to be successful in the music industry, and the zany things that happened and the crazy stories that all came out of that was a part of the fun of just the adventure and the dream.
If you consider the Monkees more like the Marx Brothers,
yes,
makes so much sense.
Yeah.
They screened Marx Brothers movies for us. They had in mind, along Bob and Bert, of course, but there were others. There was Paul Mazursky and Larry Tucker. I've heard the name Paul Mazursky.
Sure.
They wrote the pilot.
Sure.
Lee Gardner and Jerry Caruso big TV writers at the time.
Yeah.
So this was not accidental. This must have been part of the Bible, which is what we call the theme spine of the show.
Right.
These guys cannot be successful. They must always love each other. There was no Three Stooges. I remember them saying, no Three Stooges. They did not scream. And I like the Three Stooges, but that was a very different kind of vibe.
Right.
You know, no, you never criticize, you never hate, you never slap, you never each other. It's camaraderie. It is one for all for. It was more like the Three Musketeers, obviously.
Absolutely.
And that was intentional. I don't know necessarily where it all came from. The original concept, my understanding, is Bob Rafelson, up and coming director, writer, producer guy. He had tried to sell a show about a folk group, like Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Yeah.
Because I gather he had worked as a roadie on the road with some folk group. And he thought, wow, this would make a cool show if we dramatize it and make it. He couldn't sell it. This is early 60s. Beatles come along, rock and roll comes along, the Beach Boys, and he revisits it, this is my understanding, and turns it into 4 guys, 1 English kid, and 3 bell bottoms and stuff in this beach house. And they have this Marx Brotherian. Hey, I coined that, I think.
That's beautiful said, because I thought
Marx Brotherian.
it really has that. The Marx Brothers had that feel, and it's interesting you say that because the Marx Brothers they were quirky, they were fast, there was music, all of that musical.
They could
genre.
sing, they could play.
Sing, absolutely.
And so that is how I remember. And by the way, Dom, you might get different entire versions of this from Mike or Peter.
Yeah.
Not David, unfortunately, but because the whole thing is a little bit like Rashomon.
Yeah.
From my attitude, I was coming as not just an actor, because I had already backtrack a bit, I had already recorded, but I had already been in cover bands. Mickey and the One-Nighters, pre-Monkees, the Missing Links, doing cover tunes, essentially.
Yeah.
All around Denver, Colorado, a bowling alley here, bar, and singing Johnny Be Good, Walking the Dog, Louie Louie, House of the Rising Sun, cover band stuff.
Right.
Johnny Be Good eventually was my audition piece for the Monkees on guitar. And I do it to this day,
Which
and I
you
tell the
knew-
story.
You knew that song inside and out.
Of course, I've
Absolutely.
sang it 100 times
Absolutely.
in bars and that was the music of the day. House of the Rising Sun was one of my big party pieces.
Yeah.
Walking the Dog, Long Tall Sally,
Yeah.
Richard. That was where I was going musically.
Yeah.
The producers heard me sing this stuff. They would come down to the club, the famous club in Los Angeles at the time in Hollywood called the Red Velvet, run by Tony Farah, whose daughter ended up dating Elvis. And it was me and the Righteous Brothers before they hit, and others. And Monday night was the open mic night. And it wasn't karaoke. That didn't exist yet. There was a band. There was a live rock and roll band. And you'd say, I'm going to do Johnny Be Good and Money by Barrett Strong. And I'd go out there and and sound no life all free. You can give it to the birds and bees. Give me. And the producers came down during the casting process and they would see me. So God love them, and I bless them and thank them to this day, Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider. And Jackie Cooper, who was the head of Columbia Screen Gems.
Yes.
An actor and a
Yes.
singer.
Yes. And a
And
child prodigy or whatever.
And a what? And a child prodigy, and a wonderful, incredibly, he made it through.
Yeah.
So obviously, he's the one that green-lighted the project. He's the one that bought it at Screen Gems Television. Bob and Bert must have come in, pitched, and said, yeah, let's develop that. That would have been Jackie friggin' Cooper.
That's amazing.
And so he got it. And I remember talking to him and him influence and stuff. So, like I say, it was in the air. Somebody wanted to do a music pop 60s generational thing. And there was a lot of resistance from the traditional television industry and politics and social media at the time. The Monkees brought long hair into the living room. Up until then, to the Monkey Show, the only time you saw young men or women, 20s, teens, 20s, hippie, rock and roll, they were being arrested on television. And all of a sudden, there's a wonderful chapter in Timothy Leary's book called Politics of Ecstasy, where he talks about the Monkees for like half a chapter. And before I even figured it out, I mean, just like, I was like, whoa. He describes this as how it brought this Sufi kind of crazy psychedelic, which was happening in the music business with the Beatles and that, but not accepted by the mainstream zeitgeist.
Yeah.
All of a sudden the Monkees come along. Bell bottoms, paisley, long hair. But we're good guys. We're fun. We're easy. We just want to be singing. Don't put anybody down. And having fun and saving the girl from the bad guys and like giving money to the old lady that can't pay her rent. And it made it okay to have long hair and bell bottoms and paisley. And you weren't committing crimes against nature.
Absolutely.
And you were not being arrested. A lot of criticism from who I call the hippoisie at the time. Oh my God, you're corrupting the whole music movement, rock and roll. You can take that for what it's worth. It happened a couple times since then. One was Happy Days when Henry made it okay to wear a leather jacket and ride a motorcycle. And he wasn't a psycho knife-wielding Marlon Brando in The Wild Ones. You know, it was okay. He was like, oh yeah, talk, blah, blah. And you weren't a criminal. You weren't. He did that with that imagery.
Absolutely.
Will Smith did it in Fresh Prince. It's okay to be a young black man and sing rap or whatever, hip hop. And you weren't a criminal, you weren't in prison, you weren't like, so it has happened again. But the Monkees was probably one of the original.
It was the first, because as my family, my two older brothers and my younger sister, we started playing music. And we started to really understand the elements of us now fitting into society, which might have meant longer hair or long sideburns. When my parents watched the Monkees, they liked you guys. And I'm talking old school Italians, so they had really hard set values in the way the world should go and what they wanted to see out of their children. But that made it easier for us to then go out in the real world, play music, be accepted, and we were just good guys wanting to play music.
Look, the Monkees aren't committing crimes against nature. And I gotta be honest, I didn't have a whole lot to do with that premise, that Bible, that I was an actor, singer that made my contribution and started out making just acting and singing. But that feeling, that idea was inherent even in the theme song, if you listen to the original theme song. So somewhere along the line, and I think it had a lot to do with probably Jackie Cooper, it had to do with the network buyers who said, we can't put anything crazy and ridiculous up here, like the Smothers Brothers did eventually, which was wonderful. It was so funny and so brilliant and so incredible.
They broke more barriers.
But they got, they got canceled, So the Monkees tread that fine line. I'm proud of it, obviously. But there was criticism, you're selling out, you're like making it, pablum and stuff like that. But the letters I get to this day about people who say, you gave me something to hope for. You gave me something to love.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And when you think about the music industry today, We need that again, and we need that
I
continuity.
was different, and you made it okay
Absolutely.
to be different.
Look what you did. Look at the lives you changed, and look at the hope you gave.
Sorry.
That's all right, Mickey. This is beautiful. This is a wonderful passion that you have, that you've combined this acting and musical influence, and you put this into the culture of America. This is really fantastic in such a positive way.
Well, not just me. Let's be clear. There's Mike and Peter and David, of course, who
Yeah.
also obviously contributed.
Beautiful team.
And Bob and Bert, huge creators, but there were so many others, and I always talk about the songwriters.
Yeah.
Look at the songwriters: Carole King, and Jerry Goffin, Neil Diamond, Boyce and Hart, Neil Sedaka, Harry Nilsson. The list just goes on and on.
Great.
That had a huge impact. But the screenwriters of the show, brilliant writers of the time. I mentioned Paul Mazursky and Larry Tucker, who wrote the pilot.
Yeah.
But then other incredible songwriters. And then everybody else involved, the guest stars, and it was a massively collaborative effort. And I can take some credit, but I've got to give credit where credit is due. Bob Rafelson directed a number of the episodes, one of the creator.
Yeah.
But then Jim Frawley, I have to shout out to. At the time he was Jim, I think he's James now. I don't. He was this young, hip, crazy, brilliant comedic talent. He just got out of Second City with Mike Nichols and Elaine May. And Bob, I don't know how they met. He came on as our improv coach, Second City kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I remember early days when I finally found out I was going to be one of the Monkees. The first sessions were improv. Jim Frawley going, throw the ball, do this, you are a ship captain and you're a whale, and come up. I was uncomfortable doing improv. I didn't get it. I was used to a script, boom, think, read my lines, learn my lines, go read the words.
Right.
I was not really comfortable. Maybe I'm still not. Mike Nesmith was brilliant.
Yeah.
He was like, oh my God. But right from day one, Jim started directing a lot of the episodes because Bob was busy producing. We won 2 Emmys for the show. Best comedy and then best directing, I think, for Jim. We had a lot of trouble keeping people employed because it was crazy. This had never happened. 66, this was old Hollywood.
Yeah.
You didn't improvise. You didn't go crazy and nuts. But Bob and Bert and Jim and the writers had created a extremely improvisational, spontaneous atmosphere. And it had its upside, which was the footage and the thing. The scenes were just like, could become just crazy and nuts. Some they would use, and most they would probably chuck out. The downside was there were times when the 4 of us melted down, and I equate it to a fission reaction. I'm a science geek, physicist kind of geek. And if you know about fission, if you don't contain it, it melts down through the earth.
Right.
Fukushima and Chernobyl.
Exactly right, yeah.
And they created, intentionally, this environment where they encouraged us to be spontaneous, to be improvisational, just what do you come up with? Which is great, but 20-year-olds
Yeah.
in the 60s, and there were many times when the whole set would shut down. I mean, we would just, I'm not kidding, literally be bouncing off the walls. I mean, just literally flying off the walls, and Bob or somebody would say, that's it, it's a wrap. And you know, I look back and I think, I'm so sorry, you know, because some of the guest stars would get so ticked off, you know, because they're old school. Hans Conried, one of the greatest character actors in the world, did a wonderful episode with us. But at one point during one of the scenes, he said, I hate these friggin' kids. I hate these kids. Because he was old school. And we are just like, I'm not kidding. It was like plutonium. Like just going, but that's what they wanted. That's what they asked for. And a little bit of that applied to the music, and that's what I was kind of getting around to. They had hired us all, clearly, because they wanted all of these talents. They wanted acting, comedy. The screen tests were a lot about comedy and timing and relationship and that kind of chemistry. I remember doing a lot with David. I think they saw us as kind of, probably because we both had acting chops. He had been on Broadway and TV. I'd had a series on TV. So we got it. Mike and Peter had never done acting, but were really good at music and at spontaneity and like crazy kind of stuff. So I think that probably had something to do with it. But right from day one, they were looking for these chemical moments, and they got it.
They got it consistently.
Oh yeah.
Which was absolutely amazing for you and your craft. I mean, that you really know your craft well, and you guys were young.
20.
That's amazing.
I was 20.
Yeah. The show, we understand that part of it. Let's talk about the business side of what you learned from that and what your takeaway was from that.
Well, the first thing I would say to someone starting in the business, which I think is what you're sort of leading up to, the first bit of advice would be get a good lawyer.
Yeah, that really is profound.
Very important. Get a good lawyer. There's two words in showbiz: show and business. Yeah. And you'd be surprised how many people don't kind of get that or connect it. Either you think it's all about show, my talent will out,
right,
or you think it's all about the business. Right. If I just, you know, pound away. It's not. It has to be both. There's a lot of ramifications of that, but essentially, in our business, our cargo in any aspect of show business is emotion. It's not the CD, it's not the film, it ain't the tape, it ain't the physical manifestation. It is what the artist is capable of somehow, sort of magically and miraculously. We sell emotion. Right. If you watch Casablanca, you are not concerned about the film. It's not film anymore. It's some digital download to, you know, Netflix.
Right.
What you are buying, what you are responding to, what you are connecting to, is the emotions that those actors and those writers and those producers and those directors, that they have somehow magically managed to encapsulate in some physical form. It ain't the physical form. It's the emotions. That's our cargo. That's what we sell. You'd be surprised how many people don't get that we're selling emotion. Singing, acting, writing, books, whatever you want to call it, it ain't the medium. The medium is the message. The way I kind of look at it is that you got to wear both hats if you want to be in this business. You got your show hat and you got your business hat. Now, we've seen so many instances of people who are incredibly talented. Nothing happens. You're like, why? They were so good. What's sort of unique is that we are not only the vacuum cleaner salesman, we're the vacuum cleaner. And it's real tough to sell yourself. You can easily go over this way and become arrogant and like bull, you know, just kind of, or you can go this way where you just are infertile. I don't want to talk about me. I can't. Somewhere in the middle, I find over the decades, if you can combine that show, that sensitivity, that art, if you can bring that here and you can bring some sort of business sense to sell it, in case you don't want it, unless you don't want to sell it, if you don't care, if you just want to, you know, do your art and you don't care if anybody buys it or not, that's fine.
If you want to make money, you got to.
If you want to make a living,
make that marriage work.
You got to make that marriage. That's really, really difficult to do because in most other business, there's a massive separation between the product and you. If you're selling something, whatever,
fantastic.
White collar, blue collar, you're selling cars, you're selling this, you don't have that connection. If you're selling the new line of Fords, you can go home to your wife and say, boy, this line really, it's terrible. It's like, and you go and you try to sell the car and you don't sell it, you don't go home and shoot yourself, you don't go home and cry. You try to sell yourself, your art, your personality, your essence, your everything you are in your music or your acting or your writing and they don't like it. That's tough.
That's tough. That's really
because
tough.
there's very little separation between you, the persona, and the person. That's the hardest thing to get a grip on. If you can somehow separate the person from the persona, that helps a lot. You still might have some challenges, but at least you're on your way to. There's some wonderful, wonderful artists that have been able to do this over the decades. Madonna is one. I mean, she's like reinvented her, and actors and singers and writers and people that are able to manipulate, navigate the waters. And that's the second thing, is when you do become incredibly successful, it's a blessing and a curse. You try so hard to be successful. And you do become successful. And you create this character in music or in, you know, David Bowie was another one who just like so incredible. It's just like, boom, off in all these directions. Hard to do, tough to do, because your fans, your hardcore, they want to just sing your hits. The way I kind of look at it is like your career, you try to build this career, kind of like a train, excuse the pun. You get it rolling down the track. I don't know if you know a lot about classical physics, but it's inertia. It's like force equals mass times acceleration. And you get this thing rolling, and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of work, power and energy. You get this monkey train going with RCA and NBC and Screen. This thing gets rolling, and you've tried hard to get it rolling and build this inertia and this traction, and you hit wreck. And then one day you discover that it's left without you. It's like, what? Wait, what? Bye. Now, you have some options when that happens, and this happens all the time. If you think about it, to actors who get typecast, musicians, singers, writers. You have a couple of choices, I think like three. You either stay on the train and milk it and go for it, which is fine. People do that, and they ride the train, and they're like, yeah. Or you kind of say, I want to reinvent. I want to do something new. I want to. You nudge it. You know, you're not stopping it, but you're kind of applying a little force to the in the lateral direction, and you get the train to kind of, Madonna, like I mentioned,
A little different direction, yeah.
You kind of get it to go this way a little bit or go that way a little bit, and you reinvent yourself, and that's wonderful and it works. Or you can try to stop the train, which is basically impossible. You got this friggin', locomotive, and you're in front going, we've seen that too.
Absolutely.
We have seen that in talent and people and singers and actors. That usually does not happen. The train just runs you over. And
this is a little bit like Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Exactly.
That's what
and the train just says, excuse me, I'm sorry, out of the way, and runs over you.
Yeah.
Actually, there is a fourth, and that is you get off the train and you wave goodbye and you say, thank you so much, bless you, wonderful train.
I enjoyed the ride.
Have a great...
Yeah.
That is kind of what I did,
Yeah.
in retrospect. I don't even know if I knew it at the time.
Right.
I think after the Monkees, I realized I was not going to get hired as a serious actor anymore. People thought I was a drummer. In fact, I would go to auditions, interviews for parts, and they would say, we don't need a drummer, what are you doing here? Except for Gary Marshall, who had me in for the Fonz. And
Who
it was,
also was a drummer,
yeah,
Gary Marshall.
it's true. And God love him,
Yeah.
he had me in, and it was down to Henry and I.
Wow.
I remember the callback. And Henry tells me years later, and we became really good friends. He said, I saw you there and I thought, oh, I'll never get this. Mickey Dolenz stuff. But he was brilliant. I mean, much better. I can say this with all honesty. He was the Fonz. He was absolutely wonderful and brilliant. But that's a choice. And that is the one that I made.
Interesting.
I waved goodbye. And I said, thank you, Monkey Train, I love you. Because I got lucky and I started directing and producing television in England, and didn't sing, didn't act, didn't do nothing for years and years.
Boy, this is fantastic, fantastic advice, and really, really powerful. In closing, if we had to think about, younger kids watching this interview and being influenced by yourself and going back and researching what you've done, what bit of advice would you give them for them to follow their dream, for them to continue on with that glimmer in their eye? What would you tell them?
Get your head around the fact that there's two words, show and business. That's probably the most important thing I can leave. Obviously, you have to be good at the talent show part, and work on your craft and work on your technique and rehearse and study and get the show part, the music or acting. And if you don't fancy doing the business part, that's okay too. But you've got to get somebody who does do it. Learn how to hire people, connect with people, bring on people into your tribe who can do that. You don't have to necessarily do it all yourself, but you've got to learn how to recognize a good agent and get connections and get responsibilities. There's a great fallacy in this business. We hear about it all the time. And they say it's all bull.
Yeah.
That's not true. In every business, there's a function called R&D, research and development. It exists in every business. Automobile industry, pharmaceutical, every
Computers,
industry
everything,
has
everything.
R&D.
Yeah.
In our case, R&D happens in your face every day, in restaurants, in bars, on the streets. We are out there doing our R&D, pitching shows, pitching a song, pitching an act. It happens much more in our faces rather than in a basement in Detroit where some guy comes up with a car design in R&D and they keep it secret. Don't buy into that BS kind of thing. It's not BS. You have to develop relationships. Every business does. In show business, it just becomes more public.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Don't worry about it. You have to go out there. You got to be a salesman. You have to be the vacuum cleaner salesman and the vacuum.
That is beautiful. That really is beautiful. I'll tell you, Mickey, I am so impressed with your passion, with your emotion, with your insight into the show part and the business side. I have been influenced by you for many, many years in those early days, and the struggle that you went through in the Monkees TV shows was a struggle that I related to. You gave me hope, you gave many people hope for us to keep on moving on. You have done that and it's succeeded and you have made a difference. And I must tell you, we thank you so much on behalf of the sessions, and I'm a believer.